In this unit, we're going to look at something called span of control. And span of control simply means how many people report directly to a single manager. If I were to ask you how many people you thought you could supervise, you might say 5 or 6. If you were feeling really brave, you might say 10 or 15. If you were really insecure about your management abilities, you might say, well, only 2 or 3. In fact, that's a more difficult question to answer than you might think. You can change your span of control. You can make it larger when you can easily monitor your employees and when they have very similar jobs. Think about this. Imagine that you are managing an assembly line. You're able to look down across the assembly line and you can see what everyone is doing. If there's a problem, if somebody is not working or has a question, you can immediately see what's going on. So if you can easily monitor a set of employees, then you can have a larger span of control. You can supervise more of those employees. In situations where you can't physically see the employees, we often look at systems using information technology, other tools that let us monitor them even though we can't physically see them very well. The other thing that affects your ability to how many employees you can control and how many you can supervise is the similarity of their jobs. If everybody you're supervising is doing about the same thing, then it's very easy to compare what they're doing. Typically, you could supervise very large groups of people because what you would do is look at who's doing the best and who's doing the worst. You would ask yourself, which employees are producing more than the average? I want to pay attention to them so I can learn how they're able to do that. Maybe we can change the process and make everyone that productive. I also want to look at those employees who are producing less than the average. I want to try and understand why they're having a problem and see if I can motivate them to work harder. But the bulk of the employees in between, I don't have to pay a lot of attention to. So I can supervise very large numbers of employees when I can monitor them and when they have similar jobs. Also, when my employees are well trained and they are organized into formal teams. This means they don't need as much supervision from a manager as they would be if they were not so well trained or if they didn't have their own team organization. When you put people into a team, leaders emerge, everyone on the team is able to work together a little bit better, and as a result, they need less supervision from a manager. So, everybody's got the same kind of job, they're easy to monitor, and they're well trained and organized into teams. You can have a very, very large span of control. If you don't have those things, then you're going to need a much smaller span of control. Now let's look at what span of control really does to an organization. In this case, I've created an organization that has a span of control of 3. The CEO, the Chief Executive Officer, has 3 vice presidents that report to him or her. Each of those has a set of 3 managers that report to him or her. So we have a consistent span of control throughout the organization, and we have 3 levels of management doing this job. Now honestly, in most cases, a span of control of 3 is a very small span of control. Let's look at what happens when we expand it. A span of control of 6 means that everyone can supervise at least up to 6 people at a time. What this has let us do is get rid of 2 vice presidents. We got rid of 1 vice president and moved their span up to report directly to the CEO. We then added 2 groups of managers together for a single vice president span of control of 6 people. This has allowed us to eliminate 2 very expensive management positions. Those vice presidents probably didn't like losing their job, but the organization as a whole is now able to do the same work with fewer managers, which means they're saving money. If we continue to increase the span of control, something even more interesting happens though. If we set span of control in this case at 9, suddenly we've eliminated all of the vice presidents. we have completely eliminated an entire layer of management. The CEO now supervises directly all 9 of those subordinate managers. Now, this CEO is a lot busier than he or she was when they only had to supervise 3 vice presidents. At the same time, having lost those vice presidents and eliminated the entire level of management, the organization gained some advantages. Of course, cost, but also it has much shorter up and down lines of communication. As a child, you probably played a game called the telephone game, where one child starts a phrase and whispers it to the next child. And at each whispering to the next child, a little bit of information is lost and confused. And by the time that phrase gets back to the first child, it's often unrecognizable. With fewer people in an organization, with fewer layers, there are fewer children in the game of telephone. We refer to this as flattening an organization, and it's called flattening an organization because organizations that have multiple layers, when we draw a little pyramid around them, they look very tall. They're sometimes called vertical organizations. They're tall and thin. If we can eliminate one or more layers of management, then we flatten the organization. We push it down. The organization has the same width at the bottom, but much less height. And this is known as a flat or sometimes as a horizontal organization. There are some very significant advantages and some disadvantages to flattening the organization. Now, how much flattening you can really do, what you can really do with the span of control, depends on how much supervision employees actually need. If you make your span of control larger than it should be, you'll begin to see problems with control. You'll begin to see organizations, you'll begin to see processes going off track, getting farther and farther away, having more trouble recovering to plan. Managers will be more stressed. They'll spend more time trying to track the operations of larger groups of employees, and the organization's ability to execute its plans will suffer. If you have too small a span of control, you'll have inefficiency, too many managers, watching too few employees, and frankly, with not enough to do. Now, when you're thinking about this, a flat organization gives you some advantages. It has lower cost, and it has those better up-down communications. Fewer people in the game of telephone, fewer chances for orders and for questions to be misunderstood and for information to be confused. That's why you want a flat organization. A taller organization, those vertical organizations, they have higher costs, but they also allow managers more time to plan, more time to analyze. In an extremely flat organization, managers are often so busy running the organization day to day, they have no opportunities to think about the future, no opportunities to update strategic plans and to think more broadly. As a result, they're often surprised by changes in markets and external factors that they just didn't have time to watch. So, in a situation, in a market, in an industry where things are very, very stable, where there's a low level of technological change, where markets are stable, etc., you can produce a very flat organization and make it successful. But when things begin to change, and you need to pay more attention to things externally, you may need to expand your control and add a layer or two of management. So, always make your organization as flat as you can without losing control. This is sometimes a dance, and it's sometimes you have to change back and forth until you find the span of control that works just right for you. Most organizations don't have a formally stated span of control that everyone in the organization follows, and span of control varies a lot depending on how the job is designed and what a manager is responsible for. But always remember, flat is good as long as you can make it work. If you can't, then you will have to add additional layers of management. I would encourage you to read the chapter associated with this unit and to review the questions in this unit and try and answer them on your own. If you're at all confused about span of control, if you have any questions, then I would invite you to review this video as often as you need.